It was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that crawled under your skin and stayed there. The kind that filled your lungs with grief instead of air. Private First Class. Jonah Maddox was on his knees, surrounded by burning metal and the shattered remains of his squad's dropship. Ash floated through the air like snowflakes from hell. His hands, shaking, were wrapped around the lifeless body of Corporal Marcus Dune, his brother in everything but blood. Marcus had taken the hit meant for Jonah. A split-second decision that left his own chest caved in, armor torn, eyes glassy and fixed on a sky that no longer mattered. Jonah didn't scream, didn't curse, didn't even blink. He just stared at Marcus's face like it was the last thing tethering him to reality. He could still hear his last words. "Tell Mom. Tell her I fought to the end." The Vractal stood beyond the scorched crater edge, watching. Insectoid, armored, taller than any man, their mandibles clicked as they assessed the scene. Efficient killers with no concept of mourning. "He does not speak," one of them rasped in their clicking language. "Grief," said another. "The humans break when they lose one of their own." Their commander, Varizal, took a step forward, his chiton shining in the heat. Number, they do not break. They change. Jonah didn't hear their words, but something inside him shifted. He reached up slowly and wiped a single tear from his cheek with the back of his glove. That single tear glistened like glass in the firelight. One drop. One signal. It wasn't weakness. It was the warning. The Vractal didn't understand what it meant. Not yet. Jonah stood up slowly, placing Marcus's body gently on the blackened dirt. Then he reached for his belt and unclipped a small, square device, no bigger than his palm. It looked like a field medical transmitter, but it wasn't. It was a black protocol beacon. Jonah's thumb hovered over the activation switch. "No further movement, human," Varizal ordered. "You are alone. This is your end." Jonah pressed the button. No hesitation. No fear. A silent signal ripped through the atmosphere, bouncing off satellites orbiting Kirill 5. The message was clear and simple. Code Black, human loss. Aboard the orbiting Terran warship Vindication, alarms blared. Commanders didn't even question it. They just nodded grimly. "Send the fire." Back on the ground, Jonah looked up. He wasn't praying. He wasn't hoping. He was promising. "You shouldn't have touched him," he whispered. "You shouldn't have made me cry." The Vractal began to retreat as the air cracked with sudden thunder. Flames streaked across the sky. Orbital cannons roared like the wrath of ancient gods. Fire bathed the forest. Explosions tore through Vractal formations like paper. Varizal turned in horror. "What have you done?" Jonah's voice was low, dead calm. "You made a human feel." Humans weren't the strongest species, not the fastest, not the smartest. But they had something far more terrifying. They could love. And when that love was ripped away, they could become something the stars would never forget. The Vractal had always believed that humans cried because they were weak. But now, watching one lone man walk through fire, face set with stone-hard rage, they finally understood. A human's tear wasn't surrender. It was a curse. The ground shook beneath Jonah's boots as the orbital strikes continued. Flames licked across the horizon like wildfire given breath. Vractal squads scattered in all directions, disciplined formations now nothing more than disorganized clumps of screaming, chittering bodies. Their black exoskeletons weren't made for heat like this. Their war songs faded beneath the roar of Earth's fury. Jonah didn't run. He walked, step after deliberate step through the shattered forest, his rifle lowered, not from mercy, but from focus. His target wasn't a random soldier. He wanted Varizal, the Vractal commander, the one who gave the kill order, the one who had laughed when Marcus begged for air. And he would find him. Behind Jonah, 2 more human survivors emerged from the smoke. Sergeant Wells and Corporal Lynn. Bloodied, burned, but alive. They had seen the beacon flare, heard the sky open, and followed the flame. When they saw Jonah, something about him stopped them from speaking. His face wasn't human anymore. It was wrath wearing skin. Wells finally spoke, voice hoarse. "Jonah, what happened out here?" He didn't look at her. "They made me cry." Lynn's brow furrowed. "You triggered a black protocol? You know what that means. High Command will turn this place into glass." "They already did," Jonah said, eyes fixed ahead. "Now I'm here to make it personal." He didn't ask them to follow. He didn't need to. They knew. Every human in that forest knew what a code black meant. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't diplomatic. It was emotional. The kind of vengeance that made generals lose sleep. And Jonah had become its symbol. Not far ahead, the Vractal regrouped near a shallow ridge. Varezal paced, mandibles clicking wildly. His second-in-command, Korthik, limped forward, half his left arm scorched and dangling. "Commander, we must leave this sector. The humans are no longer behaving logically." Varezal hissed. "They never did." That is their strength. And their disease. They grieve like children and then burn worlds in response. Korthik looked out across the burning trees. "One man, one human, did all this." "He triggered it," Varezal snapped. "But it was always there, in their kind. Emotion turns to violence. It feeds their fury." They didn't know Jonah was already watching them from the trees, scope trained on the commander's skull. He could take the shot. End it now. But he didn't want it easy. Not for Varezal. He wanted him to see the face of vengeance. A voice whispered in his ear through the comms. Lynn again. Target locked. Orders. Jonah took a slow breath. "We push forward. I want him breathing when I reach him." Wells muttered, "This is going beyond protocol." It stopped being about protocol when Marcus died. They moved like ghosts through the smoke. No words, just movement. The Vractal began to panic. They weren't used to being hunted. Not like this. They were predators on other worlds. On Kirill 5, they had come expecting weakness. What they got was something else entirely. A legend was forming around Jonah already. Human units whispered of the man who cried and called down fire. Some said he was possessed. Others said he had nothing left to lose. Either way, squads began moving in his direction, not to protect him, but to follow him. They called it the Wrath Trail. Wherever Jonah walked, vengeance followed. Above them, the Vindication's command crew watched silently as drones fed them live footage. "He's walking into the Vractal's command nest," one tech whispered. "Alone?" a lieutenant asked. "No," the admiral said. "He's walking with every dead soldier we've ever left behind, and they're walking through him." The room went silent. On the ground, Jonah emerged from the trees and locked eyes with Varezal. The alien froze. Jonah's voice was low, but steady. "You don't get to run, not after what you did." Varezal raised both arms. "You want revenge? Take it. But this war—" Jonah raised his rifle, aimed at the sky, and fired a flare. Behind him, dozens, no, hundreds of human soldiers stepped from the ruins. Burned. Bleeding. Silent. The look in their eyes wasn't anger. It was grief sharpened into war. Smoke twisted around their boots as Jonah lowered his rifle. The flare crackled red above them, casting an eerie glow across the battlefield. Varezal didn't move. Couldn't. For the first time in the war, the Vractal commander felt something unfamiliar creeping through his armored core. Fear. Not of death. Vractal warriors were bred for death. No, this was different. This was fear of meaningless death. A death that wouldn't end the war, but ignite it. He looked past Jonah at the sea of human soldiers emerging from the trees. They came silently, like ghosts born from fire. No cheers, no threats, just heavy footfalls and eyes that had seen too much loss, too much pain. Jonah stepped forward, closing the gap between them. Varezal raised a trembling claw, not in surrender. Vractal did not surrender, but in caution. "You cannot win this war through vengeance," Varezal said. "Emotion clouds judgment." Jonah's face didn't change. "And yet here I stand." Behind him, Sergeant Wells and Corporal Lynn flanked both sides, weapons raised but untouched. Their eyes never left Jonah. They knew he wasn't the same soldier who landed on Kiral 5. The man who walked with them now was a vessel for every name etched into a wall back home, every comrade buried in unmarked dirt, every mother who never got a body to mourn. Varezal tried again. "We offered terms. It was your kind that refused." Jonah's jaw tightened. "You offered terms after you executed prisoners, after you dropped plasma on a civilian hospital, after you made my brother bleed out in my hands." His voice cracked for half a second. Just half. But Varezal flinched like it was a bullet. "I see now," the alien muttered. "Your tears are not signs of weakness. They are signals." "They're warnings," Jonah replied, "and you ignored them." A Vractal sniper high in the ridge moved, maybe out of instinct, maybe out of fear. But the moment his scope caught the glint of Jonah's rifle, a single shot echoed. His head burst like a melon. Jonah hadn't even blinked. Corporal Lynn reloaded her rifle with mechanical calm. "No sudden moves, Commander." "He wants you alive, but I don't." Varezal's voice clicked with restrained rage. "You have unleashed a fire you cannot control." Jonah leaned in close, eyes burning like coals. "You set the match when you butchered my family in uniform. I just lit the fuse." Above them, the Vindication shifted position in orbit. Another volley of strikes prepared, but Admiral Green paused. "Hold fire," she ordered. "Let the ground decide." The war was no longer in the hands of generals. It belonged to a man who had cried once, and never again. In the background, more human troops filtered in. Medics, snipers, recon units, even battered mech frames stomped from the wreckage. The Vractal hadn't just sparked human retaliation. They had unified it. What terrified them most wasn't the firepower. It was the look in Jonah's eyes. It was that he didn't want their planet. He wanted their remembrance of pain. He wanted them to carry guilt the way humans carried graves. Jonah turned his head slightly and spoke into his comm. "Command, this is Maddox. I have visual on the enemy's high command." Admiral Green's voice replied, calm but laced with tension. "Understood. Protocol?" Jonah glanced at Varezal, then up at the sky. "No orbital needed. I'll deliver justice myself." Wells gave him a look. "Jonah, if we do this, there's no going back." "There was never any back," he replied. "Only forward, through fire." He stepped closer. Varezal drew one blade. The last stand of an empire was about to begin. And the galaxy would learn. Never make a human cry. The moment Varezal drew his blade, the world seemed to slow. The air grew thick with tension, as if the trees themselves held their breath. Behind Jonah, the human line didn't move. Not because they were afraid, but because they understood. This wasn't a firefight. This wasn't strategy. This was personal. Jonah dropped his rifle onto the ash-covered ground. The clang of metal against dirt rang louder than any war horn. He unstrapped the short combat knife from his thigh and stepped forward, eyes locked on the Vractal commander. No armor, no drones, no assistance, just grief turned to fury. Varezal tilted his head, mandibles twitching. "You choose the blade? Primitive Jonah didn't blink. "You don't deserve an easy death." With a shriek that rattled the forest, Varezel lunged, his twin blades slicing through the air. Jonah dodged left, barely missing a fatal arc. The alien was fast, faster than any human should have been able to react to. But Jonah moved like someone who didn't care if he died. He wasn't fighting to live. He was fighting to punish. The two clashed under the dying trees, steel hissing against chitin. Sparks flew. Each time their weapons connected, it was a scream of metal on bone. The ground became a blur of motion, slashing, dodging, blood, dirt. Varezel hissed in frustration. "You are injured." Jonah spat blood onto the ground. "I'm angry." With a savage roar, he surged forward, slashing his knife across Varezel's abdomen. Black ichor sprayed. The Vractal screeched and staggered back, but Jonah didn't let up. He followed, stabbing low, twisting deep into the alien's torso. Varezel lashed out, catching Jonah in the side. He went down hard, breath knocked from his lungs, vision flashing white. For a moment, everything blurred. Marcus's face, the dropship explosion, the crackling of flames. His mind screamed to stop. But his heart? His heart whispered one word. More. As Varezel loomed over him, blade raised for the killing strike, Jonah rolled and drove his knee into the alien's weakened joint. A loud crunch. The Vractal stumbled. Jonah was up in an instant, fueled by something not even the medics could explain. Rage, willpower, grief incarnate. He grabbed Varezel's blade arm with both hands and snapped it back. Bone and metal cracked. The alien shrieked in agony. "You thought we were weak because we mourn," Jonah growled, slamming his fist into the Vractal's mandible. "But grief is fuel, pain is a weapon, and I've been armed since you took him from me." He stabbed the knife deep into the alien's neck. Once, twice, a third time. Varezel collapsed to his knees, bleeding dark fluid, his breath rasping through shattered vocal cords. Jonah knelt beside him, panting. "You thought we cried because we feared death. But tears don't fall from fear. They fall from memory, from love, something your kind never understood." Varezel tried to speak, but all that came was a gurgled rattle. Jonah stood, looked down one last time, and drove the knife into the Vractal's skull, ending it. Silence fell across the ridge. Behind him, hundreds of human soldiers watched. Some raised weapons in salute, others lowered their heads. They didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The statement had already been made. Sergeant Wells finally stepped forward, her voice low. "He's dead," Jonah nodded, wiping the blood off his hands. Then the war just changed. Corporal Lynn looked around. "The Vractal will scatter. He was their anchor." "No," Jonah said. "They'll retaliate, but not the same way. Now they'll fear us." He turned towards the group and raised his voice. "Broadcast this moment. Let every Vractal in the system see what happened here. Let them know what happens when you take from us." Lynn tapped into her comms and nodded. "Already transmitting." Miles away, in other parts of the forest, Vractal soldiers received the feed. They saw the fire. They saw their commander die, but more than anything, they saw the human, bloodied, broken, standing tall, and the trail of tears that had led him to vengeance. They saw a human cry, and they finally understood. There would be no mercy. The image of Varezel's lifeless body spread across the Vractal communication grid like a plague. It wasn't just a tactical loss, it was spiritual. For a species that believed in dominance through control, watching their strongest commander fall to a human, wielding nothing but a blade and grief, sent tremors through their morale. Across the battlefield, Vractal ranks faltered. Discipline broke. Orders were questioned. In the central command vessel orbiting Kirill 5, High Strategist Zelthrax watched the footage in eerie silence. The room was cold, clinical, screens lined with alien glyphs and real-time combat stats. But all of it faded behind the looping image of Jonah standing over Varezel, soaked in blood, victorious through sheer emotion. One of the Vractal analysts dared to speak. Commander Varezel underestimated their species again. We believed emotion was a flaw. It is not. Zelthrax's eyes narrowed. Emotion is a flaw. But with the humans, it becomes fuel. That makes it dangerous. He tapped his claw against the glass table. Find out who he is. That human. The one who killed Varezel. Already done, the analyst replied. Jonah Maddox, Earthborn. No genetic modifications, no elite training, just a common infantryman, Zelthrax hissed. And yet he changed the war. Back on the surface, Jonah stood over the cooling corpse of the alien commander. The ridge around him was scarred from fire and blood. Human soldiers began spreading out, securing the perimeter, sweeping for remaining Vractal forces. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning for movement. Jonah said nothing. Wells came up beside him, a cautious hand resting near her weapon. Jonah, this is bigger than we expected. Your face is all over the feeds. Command wants you off-world, immediately. He didn't look at her. I'm not going anywhere. Command thinks the Vractal will retaliate. Hard. They'll send another wave, stronger, smarter. They can send gods for all I care, Jonah muttered. Let them come. Lynn chimed in from her comms. Recon units say the enemy's already reorganizing. Not full retreat, but they're not attacking either. They're watching. Good, Jonah said. Let them see me. Let them see us. He turned to the gathered soldiers, faces smudged with ash and exhaustion, but eyes burning with purpose. They thought we'd break, he shouted, voice raw and unfiltered. They thought tears made us weak, that killing our people would make us run. He paused, letting the silence stretch. But they don't understand what pain does to us. They don't know what happens when you kill someone we love. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. They made me cry, so I made them remember. Cheers didn't erupt. There were no chants or fists raised in victory, just grim nods, gritted teeth, the kind of response only soldiers who've bled too long could give. Jonah wasn't trying to inspire. He was trying to prepare. Far above, Admiral Green stood on the bridge of the Vindication, watching the surface feeds. The silence in her command deck was almost reverent. Ma'am, one of her aides said, we've received intelligence that Vractal reinforcements are inbound. 3 heavy cruisers. ETA 12 hours. She nodded slowly. Prepare the fleet. But tell the ground units. They're not just holding the line anymore. They're making history. Copy that. And what about Maddox? She took a deep breath. Protect him. But don't control him. That man just won us this planet. Down on Kirill 5th, night began to fall. But there was no peace in the darkness, just a lull between storms. Jonah sat beside what was left of Marcus's body, wrapped in the Terran flag, a temporary grave marked with scavenged metal. His hand rested on the fabric, fingers trembling not with fear, but fatigue. The weight of vengeance had its cost. Wells approached, crouching beside him. We'll get his body home. Jonah didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, I just want them to know he didn't die for nothing. They'll know, she said. They already do. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the smoke of war. Somewhere in the distance, a Vractal howl echoed, part rage, part fear, because they saw the truth. This wasn't just about strategy anymore. This was personal. And humans fight best when it's personal. Jonah didn't sleep that night. None of them did. The forest remained eerily still, but every soldier knew the silence was temporary. A storm was coming. Not one of nature, but of war. The Vractal weren't retreating. They were regrouping, changing tactics, studying Jonah like a new weapon they couldn't quite understand. And Jonah was becoming exactly that. He sat by the makeshift grave until dawn. By then, his uniform was stiff with blood and ash, his eyes red but dry. Not a single tear left. He'd already used his last one, and the galaxy had paid the price. As the pale light of Kiril Fa's twin suns filtered through the charred trees, movement stirred in the camp. Human units were reorganizing. Reinforcements had arrived from the Eastern Front. Engineers were fortifying a temporary command center in the ridge, but everyone's eyes still drifted toward Jonah. Not because he was in charge. He wasn't even the highest rank. It was something deeper, unspoken, the way a battlefield recognizes its own legend. Corporal Lin walked up behind him and sat on a rock nearby. They're calling it the Maddox Protocol now. He looked over, eyebrow raised. She shrugged. Command's naming the trigger conditions. When a soldier activates a code black due to emotional trauma and still survives the engagement, it gets classified for command study. And a name. Jonah turned his gaze back toward the grave. Don't put my name on it. It wasn't about me. Too late. It's not about what you want anymore. It's about what you became out there. He didn't respond, and Lin didn't press. Some silences didn't need to be filled. Elsewhere in the camp, Sergeant Wells was debriefing with the newest unit to arrive, Delta Echo, a hardened recon team known for deep infiltration missions. Their leader, Lieutenant Rafik, had seen the footage. He walked with the quiet swagger of someone used to being the apex on any battlefield. But even he looked grim. This isn't a tactical war anymore, he told Wells. This is emotional warfare, psychological. The Vractal have never fought an enemy who feels this much. They will now, Wells replied. Jonah eventually stood, stretching the stiffness out of his limbs. He hadn't eaten in nearly 24 hours, and his body was screaming for rest, but the fire inside him hadn't dimmed. He made his way toward the comms tent, where a message waited from Admiral Green. Her face flickered onto the holoscreen, eyes sharp and voice firm. Jonah Maddox, you've become the symbol we didn't know we needed. Your actions have shaken the Vractal command. They're regrouping for a major strike. Intelligence suggests they're preparing a psychological assault, distorted broadcasts, mimicry of human voices, even holograms of the dead. Jonah's jaw clenched at that. They're trying to turn your strength into a weapon against you, she continued. I'm giving you permission to lead a counter-offensive. Not because of your rank, but because you've earned the loyalty of the people down there. And frankly, you scare the Vractal more than any admiral could. The message ended, and the screen faded to black. Jonah stood there for a while, digesting it. He wasn't a commander. He never wanted to be a hero, but the galaxy didn't care about what he wanted. They'd turned him into a symbol of fury, of grief, of vengeance, and now they expected him to wield it. Outside, Wells met him halfway. You heard? She asked. He nodded. They want me to lead. She smirked. You've already been leading. You just haven't been calling it that. I'm not a strategist. No, she agreed. But you're the reason morale hasn't shattered. You're the reason the Vractal are afraid. Jonah glanced at the line of soldiers cleaning their weapons, reinforcing trenches, reloading supply crates, tired, bruised, but more determined than ever. He turned back to her. Then let's give them a reason to stay afraid. From the high ridge, he climbed onto a piece of wrecked armor and looked down at the gathered units. Vractal forces are coming, he called out. Stronger, meaner, smarter. They think we'll break if they mimic our pain. That if they show us ghosts, we'll drop our weapons. He looked each of them in the eye. But we don't run from ghosts. We carry them. The soldiers straightened, rifles loaded, blades checked, explosives primed. Jonah raised his weapon to the sky. "When they come, show them what it means to make humanity cry." And across the ridge, the reply came in one unified voice. "No mercy." The Vractal came at sundown, not in swarms like before, not with mindless aggression, but in chilling silence. Their new tactics were colder, more calculated. Jonah stood at the ridge's edge as the horizon darkened under clouds and warships. The air vibrated with something wrong, the kind of wrong you couldn't name, but could feel in your bones. Then the whispers started. Human voices. Familiar ones. Jonah froze when he heard it. "Jonah, it's me. You left me." Marcus's voice. The Vractal had learned fast. Holograms shimmered between the trees, half-visible projections of dead soldiers, friends, even lovers. The aliens had studied fallen humans from recovered tech, mined audio logs, helmet cams, personal messages. Now, they weaponized them. "Jonah," the Marcus ghost whispered, stepping into view. "You watched me die. Why didn't you save me?" Other soldiers across the line began to falter. Some dropped their rifles. One woman dropped to her knees, sobbing at the sight of her sister's hologram walking through smoke. Another screamed when her dead husband's voice crackled through her helmet. Panic was spreading. Fear. Doubt. Exactly what the Vractal wanted. But Jonah didn't move. His fists were clenched so tight his knuckles bled. His throat tightened at the sound of Marcus's voice. It was perfect. Too perfect. The walk, the inflection, even the little smirk he used to give. "Why didn't you save me, Jonah?" the ghost asked again. And finally Jonah answered. "I did save you," he said, voice shaking but rising. "Every Vractal I've killed since you died. That was me saving you over and over." The hologram didn't react, but Jonah kept talking, not to the projection, but to the soldiers behind him. "They want us to think grief is weakness, that our memories make us soft, but they don't know that pain sharpens us." He stepped forward, directly into the Marcus ghost, and it fizzled. "It makes us faster. It makes us fight harder." He pointed to the forest. "That's not your brother. That's not your wife. Your friends didn't come back from the dead. That's the Vractal mocking them, using our love like a knife." His voice turned into a shout. "So take that knife and turn it back on them." The spell cracked. One by one, soldiers raised their weapons again. A heavy gunner wiped his eyes, growled, and powered up his turret. The woman who had collapsed earlier stood and shouldered her rifle, face carved with rage. Sergeant Wells stepped beside Jonah. "That speech wasn't regulation." He looked over. "Neither is this war." A sudden scream came from the left flank. Vractal troops burst from the tree line, no longer using illusions. Now they attacked with precision. Smaller units, faster, each targeting human weak points identified from previous battles. But this time, they met something they hadn't expected. Unity. Jonah led the charge himself, not from behind, but at the front, knife in one hand, rifle in the other. He didn't fight like a soldier anymore. He fought like a man possessed, like the embodiment of every name etched into a memorial wall back on Earth. Lynn and Wells were right behind him, taking down Vractal scouts with precision shots. The rest of the Terran forces moved as one, not flawless, but fueled by something the Vractal couldn't simulate. Heart. The battlefield became a storm. Blood. Metal. Smoke. Sorrow turned to action. At one point, Jonah came face to face with a Vractal war priest, larger than the others, layered in ritual armor. It chittered a warning in its native tongue before charging. Jonah didn't flinch. He ducked the first strike, shot twice into its chest, then tackled it into the dirt. He tore its helmet off, revealing multi-eyed rage, and plunged his knife through its throat with a growl. Tell your gods humanity cries in blood, he spat. The line held, then pushed forward. By night's end, the forest was quiet again, but this time, the silence was theirs. The Vractal had underestimated what it meant to be human, to grieve, to remember, and now they finally understood. The humans didn't just fight with weapons, they fought with loss, and there was no defense against that. The sun rose slowly over Kiral Fifth, its twin orbs casting long shadows through the smoke-hazed forest. Where just hours ago blood soaked the soil and metal screamed against metal, now only silence remained. But it wasn't the silence of death. It was the silence of victory. Jonah stood atop the hill where Varzal had died, looking out over the battlefield. The ground below him was scorched and cratered, littered with Vractal corpses and shattered fragments of their illusions. The human dead had already been collected and wrapped, each one honored, each one remembered. His body ached. Every limb screamed for rest. His side was stitched where a blade had grazed his ribs. But he didn't feel pain anymore, not the kind that could be fixed with bandages. What he felt was hollow. He had done what no soldier had ever been asked to do. He had weaponized his grief and survived it. Worse, he had been changed by it, and he could feel it now, in the way other soldiers looked at him, with awe, with fear, with the kind of reverence they reserved for legends or warnings. Wells approached from behind, quiet as ever. Command's calling it a decisive win. Fractal units are retreating off-world. Their warships disengaged 2 hours ago. Jonah nodded slowly. You should be proud, she said gently. He didn't answer right away. Then, I didn't come here to be a symbol. You didn't choose to be, she replied. But you are now. People back home are already calling you the soldier who cried fire. He let out a dry, humorless chuckle. That's catchy. Sounds like a song. They're naming a warship after you. He turned to her, eyes tired. They should name it after Marcus. They won't forget him either. He's part of this story now. So are all the others. They stood there together for a while, neither speaking, just watching the wind shift through the ruined forest. Despite the destruction, birds had returned. Small native creatures with silver wings flitting from branch to branch, chirping as if the war hadn't happened, as if the planet wanted to move on. But Jonah didn't feel like moving on. Not yet. Below, soldiers began rebuilding what little could be salvaged. Medics set up triage centers. Engineers laid foundations for a permanent outpost. Flags were planted, not for conquest, but for remembrance. Corporal Lin approached with a SAT-Link tablet in hand. Message from Earth. They want to speak with you directly. High Command. Even the Council's on the line. Jonah stared at the device, then shook his head. Let them wait. They weren't here. Lin hesitated, then handed him a folded cloth. Found this in Marcus's pack. Figured it should go to you. He took it without a word. It was a photo, creased, nearly torn, but intact. Marcus standing in front of their first barracks, smiling with his arm around Jonah. Younger, cleaner, innocent. Jonah's hand trembled as he tucked it into his pocket. Thank you. Lin stepped back, leaving him to his silence. Later that afternoon, as dusk settled again, Jonah climbed to the ridge one last time. He carried a small crate with him. Ashes, not just Marcus's, but the remains of every soldier who had no one left to take them home. He opened the crate and let the wind take them. Ash swirled through the sky like a storm of memory. The fire that had destroyed now carried them onward. They would not return to Earth, but they would become Kiral Fives, a part of its soil, its wind, its story. He stood there until the last of it vanished into the air. Then, he whispered, You didn't die for nothing. Behind him, Sergeant Wells waited, helmet under her arm. "We're shipping out tomorrow. New orders. Earth wants you back." He turned to her, slowly. "They want a war hero." "You are one." "No," he said. "I'm just a man who cried once and burned a planet down because of it." She didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. As night fell again, Jonah walked through the camp. Soldiers nodded as he passed, not out of duty but out of respect, and maybe a little fear, because they all understood now. A single human tear had changed the tide of an interstellar war, and across the stars, the Vractal would never forget it, because when they saw a human cry, they finally knew what it meant. There would be no mercy.